They laughed at the woman who cleaned dog kennels. 3 days later, they saluted her as a legend they were never supposed to meet. The sound of a metal shovel scraping against concrete echoed through the kennel block at Fort Bragg Military Working Dog Training Facility. The morning sun had barely crested the North Carolina pines, casting long shadows across the rows of chain-link enclosures where some of the most dangerous combat dogs in the United States military resided. Emma Sophia Holloway knelt on the damp cement floor, her calloused hands gripping a worn plastic bucket. Her gray coveralls were stained with mud, dog hair, and substances she had long stopped bothering to identify. A faded cap covered her brown hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail that had seen better days. She was small, perhaps 5'4", with a frame that seemed built for disappearing into backgrounds rather than commanding attention. The scrape of the shovel continued its rhythm, methodical, patient, like a heartbeat that refused to quicken regardless of circumstance. "Hey, poop girl," the voice cut through the morning air like a knife through paper. Staff Sergeant Tyler Garrett stood 20 feet away, arms crossed over a chest that seemed designed specifically to intimidate. Behind him, 5 soldiers in pristine Delta Force uniforms fanned out like a pack of wolves who had just spotted something worth hunting. Their unit patches gleamed in the early light, each one a silent proclamation of elite status. "Kennel 7 needs cleaning, now. We need space for the new dog shipment." Emma did not turn around. Her shovel continued its work, scraping waste into the bucket with the same measured pace it had maintained before the interruption. Garrett's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being ignored, particularly not by someone he considered several rungs below him on every ladder that mattered. At 32, he had spent a decade building a reputation as one of Delta's most aggressive operators, a man who solved problems through force and intimidation in equal measure. The thought that a kennel worker, a woman no less, would dare to dismiss his presence was something his ego could not process. "You deaf?" He stepped closer, combat boots crunching on gravel. "Or maybe you just don't understand English." A laugh rippled through the group behind him. Corporal Megan Lawson, the only female in the Delta contingent, crossed her arms and let her gaze travel slowly over Emma's stained coveralls. Her expression carried the particular disdain of someone who had clawed her way into an elite unit and now looked down on anyone who had not achieved the same. "Leave her alone, Garrett." The voice came from Sergeant Lucas Brennan, who stood slightly apart from the group. His tone carried discomfort rather than conviction, the words of someone who knew something was wrong but lacked the courage to fully commit to opposition. "Leave her alone?" Garrett's laugh was sharp and humorless. "The only job women should have in this army is cleaning up waste and making coffee. Looks like she's already got one covered." Emma rose slowly from her crouch. For the first time since the confrontation began, she turned to face them. Her eyes, a shade of gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, swept across each face in sequence. No anger flickered in that gaze. No fear trembled at its edges. There was only observation, cold and clinical, like a sniper assessing targets through a scope. In that fraction of a second, something shifted in Brennan's perception. The way she stood, weight distributed evenly, shoulders squared but relaxed, center of gravity lowered almost imperceptibly. It was not the posture of a kennel worker. It was not the posture of someone who spent their days shoveling waste and filling water bowls. But the moment passed, and Emma simply nodded once before returning to her work. "That's what I thought," Garrett sneered. "Nothing but a glorified maid." The Delta operators moved on, their laughter trailing behind them like exhaust fumes. None of them noticed the slight adjustment Emma made to her grip on the shovel, the way her fingers found positions that would have been equally effective on a weapon. None of them saw the micro-expression that crossed her face as she cataloged each of their voices, their gaits, their weaknesses. None of them understood that they had just been evaluated by someone whose assessments carried consequences far beyond their imagination. The morning progressed with the mundane brutality of military routine. Emma finished her rounds in the kennel block, moving from cage to cage with an efficiency that spoke of intimate familiarity with both the space and its occupants. The dogs, ranging from Belgian Malinois to Dutch Shepherds, reacted to her presence with varying degrees of interest. Most acknowledged her with a sniff or a tail wag before returning to their rest. A few pressed against the chain link, seeking contact with the quiet woman who smelled of their territory. The exception was Kennel 17. Inside the reinforced enclosure, a massive Belgian Malinois named Titan watched Emma's approach with eyes that had seen things no domestic animal should ever witness. His coat was darker than breed standard, almost black in the shadows of his cage, and a lattice of scars ran across his muzzle like a map of violence survived. 3 handlers had attempted to work with Titan since his arrival at Fort Bragg. All 3 had requested transfers within a week. Emma stopped in front of the kennel. Titan rose from his bed, not with aggression, but with attention, his entire body oriented toward the woman on the other side of the chain link. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Emma's hand came up, fingers forming a shape that appeared in no standard military working dog manual. Titan's head tilted. His body relaxed, and slowly, deliberately, he sat down, eyes never leaving Emma's face. "Good boy," she murmured, so quietly that the words barely carried past the mesh. She moved on before anyone could notice the exchange. The Delta team's training session began at 0900 hours in the main demonstration area, a sprawling complex of obstacle courses, bite work stations, and tactical simulation buildings. Sergeant First Class Brandon Cruz led the technical instruction, his expertise in military working dogs evident in every precise movement and command. Captain Nathan Pierce observed from the elevated viewing platform, his expression betraying the skepticism that had defined his leadership style since taking command of the unit 3 months prior. At 41, Pierce had spent 2 decades questioning everything from intelligence reports to his own instincts. It had kept him alive through 6 deployments and earned him a reputation as the officer who could not be fooled. The kennel staff gathered at the edge of the training area, their presence required to handle equipment and manage the dogs between exercises. Emma stood among them, her coveralls marking her as the lowest member of the hierarchy, a living piece of background scenery that no one bothered to acknowledge. "All right, listen up." Cruz's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You're here because command decided your unit needs canine integration capability. That means in the next 3 weeks, you're going to learn everything from basic handling to advanced tactical deployment." Specialist Ryan Dalton, a wiry soldier with the restless energy of someone who enjoyed creating chaos more than resolving it, raised his hand. "Question, Sergeant. What's with the cleaning crew? Thought this was supposed to be a closed training session." Cruz's eyes flickered to the kennel staff, dismissing them with a glance. "Support personnel, ignore them." "Hard to ignore when they smell like what they clean," Garrett added, drawing scattered laughter. Emma's expression remained unchanged. Her hands stayed loose at her sides, fingers slightly curled in a way that would have allowed immediate action if required. No one noticed. No one was looking. The morning's first exercise involved basic bite work, with each operator taking turns commanding a trained Malinois to engage a decoy wearing protective equipment. The results were predictable. Most of the Delta soldiers had adequate skills, their backgrounds in special operations providing a foundation that Cruz could build upon. Garrett performed well, his aggressive approach translating effectively into the handler role. Cruz completed his demonstration and called for a water break. The operators gathered near a bench where supplies had been arranged, and Emma moved to distribute bottles with the rest of the support staff. She carried the tray across uneven ground, her feet finding purchase on loose gravel, and scattered debris with an unconscious grace that had nothing to do with serving water. Each step was precise, calculated, the product of thousands of hours moving through terrain where a single misstep could trigger an explosive or alert an enemy. Brennan accepted a bottle from her tray, his eyes lingering on her hands for a moment longer than necessary. The fingers that gripped the plastic were not the soft hands of someone who's spent their days on domestic tasks. Calluses marked her palms in patterns he recognized, but could not immediately place. "Thanks," he said. Emma nodded and moved on. Dalton waited until she passed, then extended his foot in a motion disguised as stretching. His boot caught the edge of her ankle, sending her stumbling. The water bottles scattered across the ground, plastic clattering against concrete. "Oops!" Dalton's grin held no apology. "Clumsy, aren't you?" Emma caught herself before falling, her recovery so smooth that it almost looked intentional. She knelt to gather the fallen bottles, her movements unhurried despite the laughter that erupted around her. As she worked, her eyes swept across the faces watching her humiliation, cataloging reactions, storing information. Brennan's expression showed discomfort. Cruz looked irritated at the delay. Pierce watched from the platform, his gaze analytical. Garrett laughed the loudest. And in the corner of her vision, Emma noted something else. Colonel Victor Ashford had emerged from the administration building. He stood at the edge of the training area, hands clasped behind his back, his attention fixed on the scene unfolding before him. When his eyes met Emma's, something passed between them, a communication that lasted less than a second, but carried the weight of shared knowledge. Then Ashford turned and walked away without a word. Emma finished collecting the bottles and rose to her feet. Her coveralls had acquired new stains from the ground, but her expression remained as unreadable as it had been from the first moment of the confrontation. Water distribution is apparently a challenge, Megan Lawson observed, her voice carrying the particular sweetness of someone who enjoyed watching others fail. Maybe she should stick to the kennels. The kennels require more skill than you might think. The words left Emma's mouth before she could catch them, her voice soft but clear. Lawson's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "Nothing." Emma lowered her gaze and retreated toward the kennel block. The momentary flash of something deeper, buried beneath her submissive posture, but Lawson had noticed. And like any predator who sensed weakness masquerading as something else, she filed the observation away for future use. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you have ever witnessed someone being underestimated because of their appearance or job title, you know exactly how this feels. Stories like this remind us that true warriors do not advertise their strength. If you value content that honors quiet professionals and hidden heroes, consider subscribing and joining our community. Your support helps us bring more untold stories to light. The afternoon session focused on dog selection and temperament assessment. Crews walked the operators through the kennel block, stopping at each enclosure to explain the characteristics of different breeds and individual animals. Belgian Malinois are the standard for military working dogs, he lectured, gesturing toward a row of identical-looking dogs with varying energy levels. High drive, intelligent, trainable, but every dog is different. Part of your job as handlers is learning to read those differences. They stopped in front of Kennel 17. Titan rose to his feet, his dark form filling the enclosure with an energy that made several operators take involuntary steps backward. A low growl emanated from his chest, not aggressive but warning, the sound of an animal establishing boundaries. "This is Titan," Cruz said, his voice carrying a note of caution. "Former combat deployment dog. 3 handlers have attempted to work with him since his return from Afghanistan. None succeeded. He's scheduled for evaluation next month to determine if he can be rehabilitated or needs to be retired." "Retired?" Garrett asked. "You mean put down?" "That's the polite way to say it." Garrett studied the dog with the calculating expression of someone who saw a challenge rather than an obstacle. "I'll work with him. Nothing I can't break." "That's not how dog handling works," Cruz replied flatly. "You don't break them. You build trust. Trust is earned through respect, and respect comes from power." Garrett moved toward the kennel door. "Let me show you." "Staff Sergeant, I strongly advise against entering that enclosure without proper preparation and—" The gate opened before Cruz could finish his sentence. Garrett stepped inside, his posture radiating the confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem he could not solve through aggression. Titan's response was immediate and absolute. The growl deepened into something primal, and the dog's body coiled with the tension of an attack barely restrained. His lips pulled back to reveal teeth that had torn through armor in combat situations. Garrett froze. For all his bravado, he recognized the difference between a display of dominance and a genuine threat assessment. The dog in front of him was not posturing. It was calculating whether to strike. "Get out!" Cruz's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Slowly. Do not make eye contact. Do not—" The situation shifted in ways none of them could have anticipated. Emma moved. She was through the gate before anyone registered her intention, her small frame slipping past Garrett and positioning itself between the operator and the dog. Her hand came up, fingers forming that same strange configuration she had used earlier, and a sound emerged from her throat, low and rhythmic, almost like a hum. Titan's attention shifted. The coiled tension in his body began to unwind, degree by degree, as his eyes locked onto the woman who had interposed herself in the space between violence and its target. The growl faded, his posture softened, and then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible given the moment before, Titan sat down and pressed his muzzle against Emma's palm. Silence claimed the kennel block. Garrett stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track, shock and confusion, and something that might have been the earliest seed of fear. The other operators stared at the scene before them, trying to reconcile what they had just witnessed with everything they believed about the woman in the stained coveralls. "How did you do that?" Cruz's voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. Emma stroked Titan's head once, her touch carrying the familiarity of old acquaintance rather than new introduction. "He needed to know he was safe, that's all." "That's not all." Cruz stepped closer, his analytical mind working through possibilities. "Those hand signals you used. They're not in any standard manual. Where did you learn them?" Emma's hand stilled on Titan's fur. For a moment, something flickered in her gray eyes, a shadow of memories she kept locked away. Then the moment passed, and she shrugged with practiced casualness. Here and there, you pick things up working with dogs. She rose to her feet and slipped out of the enclosure, leaving Garrett alone with an animal that had resumed its threatening posture the instant she departed. The staff sergeant scrambled through the gate, his dignity in tatters. "Who the hell is she?" Megan Lawson demanded, her earlier disdain replaced by something closer to suspicion. "Kennel technician," Cruz answered, but his voice carried doubt that his words did not support. 3 years on staff. Emma Holloway. That's what her file says. From the viewing platform, Captain Pierce had watched the entire exchange. His hand moved to the phone in his pocket, fingers already composing a message to the personnel office. Background checks were standard procedure for anyone with facility access, but something about the scene he had just witnessed suggested that standard procedure might not be sufficient. The kennel worker who had just tamed the untamable was hiding something. Pierce intended to find out what. The remainder of the afternoon proceeded without incident, but the atmosphere had shifted in subtle ways that everyone felt and no one acknowledged. The Delta operators went through their exercises with diminished enthusiasm, their attention repeatedly drawn to the small woman who moved among them like a ghost, performing menial tasks with an efficiency that bordered on mechanical. Sergeant First Class Daniela Ruiz, assigned to the unit as a logistics coordinator, found herself studying Emma during a break in the training schedule. Something about the hand signals nagged at her memory, a tickle of recognition that refused to solidify into certainty. She had spent 8 years in military intelligence before transferring to her current position, and those years had taught her to notice discrepancies. The signals Emma had used were not random gestures. They were structured, intentional, part of a system, and systems left traces that could be identified. Ruiz made a mental note to review the classified databases she still had access to. Somewhere in those files, she suspected she would find an explanation for what she had witnessed. As the sun began its descent toward the tree line, Master Sergeant Frank Coleman emerged from the administrative building. At 63, with 30 years of military service behind him, Coleman had retired from active duty 5 years prior, but remained on staff as a civilian consultant. His weathered face carried the lines of someone who had seen too much and remembered all of it. They called him Dusty, a nickname earned during a sandstorm in the Gulf War that had nearly cost him his life. Now he walked with a slight limp, the legacy of a wound that had ended his field career, but his eyes retained the sharpness of a man who missed nothing. He stopped at the edge of the training area, his gaze sweeping across the assembled personnel until it found Emma. For a long moment, he simply watched her work, the smallest hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Then he turned and limped toward his office, pulling out his phone as he walked. The number he dialed connected on the second ring. "It's Coleman," he said quietly. "She's here." "And she's still got it." The voice on the other end asked a question. "No," Coleman replied. "Not yet, but it won't be long. These Delta boys don't know what they're dealing with." He paused, listening. "Understood. I'll keep you posted." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his expression settling into the practiced neutrality of someone who had kept secrets for longer than most of these soldiers had been alive. The game was proceeding exactly as planned. Evening brought a change in routine. The operators were scheduled for a classroom session on canine medical care, conducted by Dr. Catherine Wells, the facility's chief veterinarian. The kennel staff was expected to attend as well, ostensibly to improve their ability to recognize signs of illness or injury in the animals they tended. Emma took a seat at the back of the room, her position allowing her to observe both the instructor and the reactions of the Delta team without drawing attention to herself. The operators filled the front rows, their postures carrying the studied casualness of men who believe themselves above the subject matter. Dr. Wells was a precise woman in her early 40s, with silver-streaked hair and the unflappable demeanor of someone accustomed to handling creatures far more dangerous than human egos. She clicked through slides showing common injuries and their treatment protocols, her voice steady and informative. "Gunshot wounds to extremities can often be treated in the field if you have the proper training and equipment," she explained, pointing to an image of a dog's leg wrapped in bandaging. "The key is controlling blood loss and preventing infection until the animal can be evacuated to a proper facility." Brandon Cruz raised his hand. "What about chemical exposure? We've had situations where canine units encountered residue from explosive materials." Wells nodded appreciatively. "Excellent question. Chemical contamination requires immediate decontamination protocols. The specific steps depend on the substance involved, but the general principle is to remove the contaminant as quickly as possible while minimizing your own exposure." The lecture continued for another 40 minutes. Emma listened without appearing to listen, her attention divided between the information being presented and the subtle dynamics playing out among the operators. Garrett whispered comments to Dalton that drew suppressed laughter. Pierce took notes with the methodical thoroughness of someone who trusted nothing to memory. Lawson filed her nails beneath the desk, her boredom evident. When the session ended, the room emptied quickly. Emma remained in her seat, waiting for the others to leave before rising to follow. She had almost reached the door when Dr. Wells's voice stopped her. "You, Holloway, isn't it?" Emma turned. "Yes, ma'am." Wells studied her with the same analytical gaze she applied to her animal patients. "That technique you used with Titan this afternoon, I saw it from my office window. I was just trying to help." "Help?" Wells's expression did not change. "What you demonstrated was a pressure point stabilization technique developed by the Delta Force K9 program for combat situations. It's not taught to civilian staff. It's not even taught to most military handlers." The silence between them stretched like a wire pulled taut. "I've worked with dogs for a long time," Emma finally said. "You learn things." "Yes," Wells nodded slowly. "I imagine you do." She did not push further, but her eyes followed Emma as the younger woman left the room. Questions accumulated in the veterinarian's mind, questions that had no easy answers. The kennel worker who smelled of waste and wore stained coveralls had just demonstrated knowledge that should not exist in someone of her position. Wells reached for her phone. She had a colleague in military intelligence who owed her a favor. Perhaps it was time to collect. The night brought quiet to Fort Bragg, but not peace. Emma lay in her small quarters near the kennel block, staring at a ceiling she had memorized during countless sleepless hours. The room was Spartan, even by military standards. A narrow bed, a metal desk, a footlocker that contained everything she had allowed herself to keep from her previous life. Her hand moved unconsciously to her right shoulder, fingers tracing the outline of something hidden beneath her shirt. The ink had faded slightly over the years, but the image remained clear enough. A black wolf, teeth bared, with the words "Ghost Pack" curved beneath and the number 7 positioned like a marker of identity. She had worn that symbol into places that existed on no official maps. She had earned it through trials that would break most men and some women. And she had buried it, along with everything it represented, in a shallow grave of anonymity. But graves had a way of opening. Sleep came eventually, bringing with it the dreams she could not escape. Fire and sand, the screams of men too wounded to move, the weight of a decision that command had not authorized but circumstance had demanded. And through it all, the eyes of her dogs, watching her, trusting her, following her into darkness because she had never given them reason to do otherwise. She woke before dawn, as she always did, and began her rounds. The second day of training started with an intensity that suggested Captain Pierce had decided to push his team harder than originally planned. The operators assembled at 0530, their faces carrying the particular expression of soldiers who had been roused from sleep earlier than expected. "Change of schedule," Pierce announced, his voice cutting through the morning fog. "Today we're going to see what you're actually capable of. Full tactical simulation. Canine integration under combat conditions." The exercise was designed to test coordination between handler and dog during a building clearance scenario. Teams of 2 would work with a single animal to locate and neutralize simulated threats hidden throughout a training structure. Points would be awarded for speed, accuracy, and minimal friendly casualties. Emma watched from the sidelines as the teams were assembled. Her official duty was to manage the dogs between exercises, ensuring they remained hydrated and calm during the high-stress evolutions. Unofficially, she found herself analyzing each operator's technique, noting flaws that proper training could correct. Garrett and Dalton formed the first team, paired with a Dutch shepherd named Ajax. Their approach was aggressive, pushing the dog hard to clear rooms quickly at the expense of precision. They finished with a respectable time, but had accumulated multiple friendly fire incidents according to the simulation's scoring system. Cruz worked with a younger Malinois, demonstrating the methodical technique of someone who understood that speed without control was merely fast failure. His score was the highest of the morning. The tension mounted as the exercises progressed. Competition among the operators bred both excellence and friction, with each team seeking to outperform the others while simultaneously undermining their rivals' success. By midday, tempers had begun to fray. The breaking point came during the lunch break. Emma was refilling water bowls in the staging area when Garrett approached, his expression carrying the particular darkness of someone looking for a target for his frustration. His team had just been outscored by Cruz for the 3rd time, and his ego demanded compensation. "Hey, poop scooper," his voice carried loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've got a question for you." Emma did not look up from her task. "What's a woman like you doing in a place like this?" Garrett continued, positioning himself to block her path. "I mean, besides the obvious, is this your big career goal, cleaning up after real soldiers?" The other operators gathered, drawn by the prospect of entertainment at someone else's expense. Even Pierce watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. "I'm just doing my job," Emma replied, her voice flat. "Your job." Garrett's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Let me tell you something about jobs. In my world, people earn their positions through blood and sacrifice. They don't get handed diversity slots because some politician wants good press." I wasn't aware that cleaning kennels was a diversity position. The response caught Garrett off guard, its dry precision cutting through his prepared insults. For a moment, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "You've got a mouth on you," he said quietly. "For someone in your position, that's a mistake." "Garrett," Brennan stepped forward, his voice carrying a warning. "That's enough. Stay out of this, Brennan. This is between me and the help. She's not the help. She's staff. And harassing staff isn't exactly conduct becoming." "Conduct becoming," Garrett rounded on his fellow soldier. "You want to lecture me about conduct? In front of everyone? Maybe you should spend less time defending kennel workers and more time not being dead last in the rankings." The confrontation might have escalated further, if not for the arrival of Command Sergeant Major Raymond Torres. At 58, Torres carried himself with the particular authority of someone who had spent 3 decades turning raw recruits into soldiers and soldiers into leaders. His uniform bore the insignia of commands that most operators only heard about in rumors, and his eyes held memories that he shared with no one. The effect of his presence was immediate. Conversations ceased, postures straightened. Even Garrett's aggression subsided into sullen compliance. Torres walked past the assembled soldiers without acknowledging them, his attention fixed on the staging area where Emma continued to fill water bowls as if nothing had happened. He stopped 3 feet from her position, close enough that his shadow fell across her work. "Holloway," he said. Nothing more. Emma looked up. For the first time since the confrontation began, something shifted in her expression. Recognition flared in her gray eyes, quickly suppressed, but not quickly enough. "Sergeant Major," she replied. Torres studied her face for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the administrative building, pulling out his phone as he went. The exchange had lasted less than 10 seconds, but Pierce had observed every nuance. The kennel worker knew the Command Sergeant Major. More importantly, the Command Sergeant Major knew her, and whatever that connection was, it had nothing to do with cleaning dog waste. His earlier background check had turned up nothing unusual. Emma Holloway, hired as a kennel technician 3 years ago, no prior military service listed, no security clearances on file, a ghost in the system, invisible and unremarkable. But ghosts, Pierce knew, were often the most dangerous things in any operation. He made another call to the personnel office. This time, he requested files that required a higher clearance level than standard inquiries allowed. The afternoon brought a new challenge. Crews had designed an exercise specifically to test advanced handling skills, requiring operators to direct their dogs through a complex obstacle course, while maintaining communication via hand signals only. No verbal commands would be permitted. Standard military working dog signals are based on the Army Field Manual, Cruz explained, demonstrating each gesture for the assembled team. Sit, stay, come, attack, release. These are the foundations. Master these, and you can handle any situation. The operators practiced their signals with varying degrees of success. Garrett, predictably, grew frustrated when his dog failed to respond to his aggressive gestures. Lawson discovered an unexpected aptitude for the subtlety required. Pierce observed and took notes. Izyasor Basarwas, known as he always did. Emma watched from the equipment station, her hands occupied with sorting leashes and harnesses. But her attention was fixed on the training area, and anyone who looked closely would have noticed that her fingers moved in unconscious sympathy with each signal being taught. The exercise began. One by one, operators attempted to guide their assigned dogs through the course. Times were recorded, errors were noted, tempers flared and subsided in the rhythm of competition. When it came time for a demonstration of ideal technique, Cruz stepped forward with his preferred working dog, a scarred Malinois named Reaper. His hand signals were crisp and precise, drawing the animal through the obstacles with machine-like efficiency. "That's the standard," Cruz announced as he finished. "Any questions?" Garrett's hand went up. Yeah, I've got one. Can the kennel girl do it? The question brought scattered laughter and more than a few uncomfortable glances. Cruz's expression hardened. This exercise is for qualified handlers only, Staff Sergeant. Why? Scared she'll embarrass us? Garrett grinned, sensing an opportunity to regain lost status at Emma's expense. I mean, if she can calm down Titan, she should be able to handle a simple obstacle course, right? The logic was flawed but effective. Cruz found himself trapped between protocol and the pressure of an audience eager for entertainment. He looked to Pierce for guidance. The captain's expression gave nothing away. "Holloway," he called out. "You want to try?" Every eye turned to the woman in the stained coveralls. Emma set down the leash she had been sorting and walked to the starting position, her pace unhurried. Her face remained unreadable, but somewhere behind those gray eyes, calculations were being made. She could refuse. A kennel technician had every right to decline participation in a training exercise designed for special operations personnel. No one would blame her. Most would forget the incident within hours. But somewhere in the crowd, Brennan watched with hope he did not understand. And somewhere in the administrative building, Torres watched through a window, his weathered face betraying nothing of his thoughts. Emma reached for Titan's leash. A murmur swept through the assembled soldiers. Of all the dogs available, she had chosen the one that no handler could control. The one that had nearly attacked Garrett in the kennel. The one that was scheduled for evaluation because he was considered too dangerous to work with. "Are you sure about that choice?" Cruz asked, his voice tight. Emma did not answer. She unclipped Titan's leash from the holding station and led him to the starting line. The dog moved beside her with the focused attention of an animal who had found something worth following. "Whenever you're ready," Cruz said. Emma's hand came up. What happened next would be discussed in hushed tones throughout Fort Bragg for months afterward. Her signals were unlike anything in the official manual, flowing configurations of fingers and wrists that seemed to communicate in a language only she and Titan understood. The dog responded with precision that bordered on telepathic, clearing obstacles, changing direction, and navigating complex sequences without a single hesitation. She completed the course in 43 seconds, 12 seconds faster than Cruz's demonstration. Silence claimed the training area. Titan sat at Emma's feet, tongue lolling, eyes fixed on her face with an expression of pure devotion. Those signals. Ruiz's voice cut through the quiet, her intelligence background demanding answers. "They're not in any manual I've ever seen." "Where did you learn them?" Pierce added, stepping closer. Emma stroked Titan's head once before answering. "Like I said, you pick things up working with dogs. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." She handed Titan's leash to Cruz and walked away, leaving behind a training area full of soldiers who had just witnessed something they could not explain. The kennel worker who cleaned waste and filled water bowls had just outperformed every elite operator on the field, and not one of them understood how. The confrontation Emma had been avoiding came that evening, in the quiet hour between dinner and lights out. Dalton had been drinking, his judgment impaired by alcohol, and the humiliation of watching his entire unit outclassed by someone they had dismissed as insignificant. He found her in the kennel block, performing her evening rounds with the same methodical efficiency that characterized everything she did. "Hey," his voice slurred slightly at the edges. "Need to talk to you." Emma did not stop her work. "Training hours are over. If you have questions about dog handling, speak to Sergeant Cruz. I don't have questions about dogs." Dalton moved closer, his posture aggressive despite the unsteadiness of his feet. "I have questions about you." "Not sure what you mean. Don't play dumb." He grabbed her arm, spinning her to face him. "Who are you really? Because kennel workers don't move like you move. They don't know what you know." Emma's eyes dropped to the hand gripping her arm. When she looked up again, something had shifted in her expression. The submissive kennel worker who had endured insults and humiliation for 2 days was gone. In her place stood someone else entirely, someone whose gaze carried the cold promise of consequences. "Remove your hand," she said quietly. "Or what?" The answer came in motion rather than words. Emma's arm rotated against Dalton's grip, her smaller frame somehow finding the leverage to break his hold. Before he could respond, she had stepped inside his guard, her palm pressed against his chest in a position that could become a strike with barely any additional force. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. Dalton stumbled backward, his intoxicated mind struggling to process what had happened. "What the—" "I said training hours are over." Emma's voice remained level, but her stance had changed, weight distributed for action rather than retreat. "If you want to discuss this further, we can arrange a formal session with witnesses. Otherwise, I suggest you return to your quarters and sleep it off." He stared at her for a long moment, his alcohol-fueled aggression warring with the sudden recognition that he had drastically miscalculated. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Emma watched him go. Only when he had disappeared around the corner did she allow herself to release the breath she had been holding. Her cover was slipping. Each interaction peeled back another layer of the identity she had constructed, revealing glimpses of something that should have remained buried. If she was not more careful, the questions would multiply until even her carefully constructed background could not withstand scrutiny. But careful had never been her strong suit. And some masks, once cracked, could never be fully restored. The night passed in restless dreams. Morning brought rain, sheets of water that turned the training ground into a muddy obstacle course, and forced the scheduled exercises indoors. The change in venue brought the Delta team into closer quarters than usual, the confined space of the tactical planning room amplifying tensions that had been building since their arrival. Pierce had received the results of his expanded background check during the night. The file on Emma Holloway was remarkably thin, consisting primarily of basic employment records and a social security number that traced back to a small town in Montana. No military service, no advanced training, no explanation for the skills she had demonstrated, which meant one of two things. Either her records had been expertly sanitized, or her records were legitimate, and she was something that defied normal classification. Neither possibility brought him comfort. "Sergeant Cruz," he said during the morning briefing, "I want a full skills assessment of all support staff today. If we're going to integrate K-9 operations into our unit, I need to know exactly what resources are available." Cruz's eyebrows rose. "Support staff, sir? That's not standard protocol." "Consider it an unofficial evaluation. Off the record." The implications were clear. Pierce wanted to push Emma into situations that would either confirm or deny his suspicions. If she was merely a talented kennel worker with an unusual gift for dog handling, the assessment would show nothing remarkable. If she was something else, the pressure might force her to reveal more than she intended. The assessment began at 1000 hours. The support staff gathered in the indoor training facility, their confusion evident. Most had expected to spend the rainy day performing routine maintenance tasks, not participating in exercises normally reserved for operational personnel. "We'll start with basic fitness standards," Cruz announced, clipboard in hand. "Nothing extreme, just want to get a baseline." The tests were simple enough. Timed runs, basic obstacle navigation, standard military fitness protocol. The support staff performed as expected, their scores reflecting the physical demands of their civilian positions. Emma's turn came last. She approached the starting line with the same measured pace that characterized all her movements. Rain drummed against the facility's metal roof, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the tension building in the room. "Whenever you're ready," Cruz said. She completed the fitness test in times that would have qualified her for special operations candidacy. Not exceptional by Delta standards, but far beyond what any kennel technician should have achieved. Cruz marked the results on his clipboard without comment. Pierce watched from the observation area, his expression giving nothing away. "Next section," Cruz announced. "Basic tactical knowledge. Again, nothing formal. Just want to see what everyone knows." The questions were designed to trip up anyone without military training. Formation terminology, radio protocol, basic combat maneuvers. The support staff stumbled through with the awkward uncertainty of civilians exposed to a world they did not understand. Emma answered with careful imprecision. Her responses were technically correct, but delivered with hesitation, as if she was reaching for knowledge that should not have been readily available. It was a performance, Pierce realized, a deliberate attempt to appear less competent than she actually was. But performances had tells, and Pierce had been reading tells for longer than most of his soldiers had been alive. "Holloway," he called out, interrupting the assessment. "One more question, off script." Emma's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Sir? Belgian Malinois? Average bite force in PSI, a standard piece of information that any experienced dog handler would know." Emma should have answered immediately, without hesitation. Instead, she paused. Her eyes flickered to something only she could see, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. 328 PSI, she answered, though individual variation can push that significantly higher in combat-trained animals. Titan's documented bite force during his last evaluation was 412 PSI, which places him in the 98th percentile for the breed. The specificity of the response exceeded anything Cruz had included in his training materials. It reflected knowledge that came not from manuals or secondhand education, but from direct personal experience. "Thank you," Pierce said quietly. "That will be all." The assessment ended shortly afterward, but the questions it raised would continue to multiply. Emma had revealed too much. Her carefully constructed facade had developed cracks that could not be patched with simple explanations. The endgame was approaching. She could feel it in the changing atmosphere of the base, in the suspicious glances that followed her movements, in the quiet conversations that ceased when she entered a room. The only question remaining was whether the revelation would come on her terms or someone else's. The answer arrived that afternoon in the form of specialist Amy Chen. Emma had noticed her in the crowd during the skills assessment, a young woman whose Asian features and compact frame marked her as an anomaly among the predominantly male, predominantly white operators. Chen had watched the proceedings with an intensity that went beyond mere curiosity, her eyes tracking Emma's every movement with the particular attention of someone searching for confirmation of something suspected. Now, as Emma sorted equipment in the supply room, Chen appeared in the doorway. "Hi," she said. Her voice carried the manufactured casualness of someone who had rehearsed an opening line. "I'm Amy. We haven't really met." "No," Emma continued her work. "We haven't. I wanted to say thanks for what you did with Titan yesterday. It was impressive." Just doing my job. Chen stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. Her next words came out barely above a whisper. "I know who you are." Emma's hands stilled on the leash she had been coiling. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. "I don't know what you mean." August 2017, Helmand Province. I was a combat support specialist attached to a forward operating base when the assault came. Chen's voice trembled with emotion. She was struggling to control. "We were overrun. 12 of us got separated from the main force, wounded, trapped. Command ordered withdrawal. We were supposed to be left behind." The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared memory. "But someone didn't follow orders," Chen continued. "Someone held a position for 9 hours with nothing but 4 dogs and enough ammunition to arm a small militia. Someone saved 12 lives that day, including mine." Emma turned slowly to face the younger woman. The mask she had worn for 3 years was crumbling, piece by piece, and she lacked the energy to maintain its remnants. "The army buried that operation," she said quietly. "There are no official records, no commendations, no evidence it ever happened. I know." Tears had begun to stream down Chen's face. "I know because they made us sign papers, non-disclosure, national security, but I never forgot. I never forgot the woman who refused to let us die. Amy, I joined the K9 program because of you. I requested this assignment because I heard rumors you might be here, and when I saw you in that kennel, when I saw the way you moved, the way Titan responded," she took a shuddering breath. "I had to know for sure." Footsteps in the corridor announced approaching company. Chen wiped her eyes quickly, composing herself with the discipline of someone accustomed to hiding emotion. "Don't worry," she said. "Your secret's safe. I had to tell you that what you did mattered, that it made a difference." She was gone before Emma could respond, slipping past Master Sergeant Coleman as he entered the supply room. Dusty watched her go, his weathered face revealing nothing. Then he turned to Emma with an expression that mixed concern with something else, something that might have been admiration. "Getting complicated," he observed. "It was always complicated." True enough. He moved to close the door behind him, ensuring privacy. "I got word from command. They're accelerating the timeline. Torres and Ashford want to move up the evaluation." "How soon?" "Tomorrow. Pierce's background checks are getting too close. Another day or two, and he'll have enough questions to request a formal inquiry." Emma leaned against the shelving, suddenly exhausted. 3 years of anonymity, 3 years of careful invisibility, and now it was all unraveling because a group of elite operators had decided that a kennel worker made a convenient target for their frustrations. "I'm not ready," she said. "You've been ready for 3 years, Dusty countered. "You just didn't want to admit it. That's not the same thing." "No." He moved closer, his voice softening. "But it's close enough. Emma, those soldiers out there, they're good at what they do. Some of them might even be exceptional. But none of them understand what it really means to be a handler, what it costs. And you think I can teach them? I think you're the only one who can." He paused, his eyes distant with memories of his own. "Your father would have said the same thing." The mention of her father sent a jolt through Emma's carefully maintained composure. "You knew him." "I trained under him. Ghost Pack, first generation. Before the name was official, before anyone understood what we were building." Dusty's voice carried decades of weight. "He used to say that the dogs weren't weapons. They were family, and family doesn't abandon each other, no matter what the orders say. He was wrong. The words emerged sharper than Emma intended. Family can be lost. Family can be buried in foreign soil with nothing but a classified marker to show they existed. Is that what you think happened? Dusty shook his head slowly. Emma, your dogs didn't die because of your choices. They died because they chose, just like you taught them, just like your father taught you. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the training area. Shouting voices, the bark of agitated dogs, the sound of something going very wrong. They reached the facility in time to witness chaos. One of the training dogs, a 2-year-old Malinois named Storm, had broken free during an exercise and was now loose in the confined space. The animal's behavior was erratic, possibly triggered by the stress of the indoor environment or some other factor the handlers had failed to anticipate. Operators scrambled for cover as Storm circled the room, teeth bared, eyes showing white at the edges. Crews shouted commands that went unheeded. Garrett reached for his sidearm before Pierce stopped him with a sharp word. Don't be stupid. You discharge a weapon in here and the ricochet could kill any of us. Then what do you suggest, sir? No one had an answer. Storm continued his agitated circuit, the danger escalating with each passing second. Emma pushed through the crowd. What the hell are you doing? Garrett grabbed her arm. Get back! She shook off his grip without looking at him, her entire focus fixed on the distressed animal. Her approach was slow, deliberate, each step calculated to minimize threat signals while closing the distance. Easy, she murmured, the word barely audible above the noise of the crowd. Easy, boy. No one's going to hurt you. Storm's circuit slowed. His ears, which had been pinned back in defensive aggression, began to rotate toward the approaching woman. Emma's hand came up, moving through a sequence of signals so fluid that they seemed less like commands than conversation. Her other hand reached slowly toward her collar, pulling free a length of paracord she kept tucked there for emergencies. The dog's posture shifted. The wild panic in his eyes began to fade, replaced by something calmer, more focused. He stopped his circuit and stood facing Emma, every muscle tense but no longer threatening. Good boy, she breathed. That's a good boy. She was close enough now to touch him, her hand extended, palm down, allowing Storm to catch her scent. The dog's nose twitched. His tail moved in a single, hesitant wag. Then Emma's other hand moved, quick and precise, looping the paracord into a makeshift lead and securing it before Storm could register what had happened. The confrontation was over. Cruz rushed forward to take control of the animal, his face cycling through relief and confusion in equal measure. How did you know that would work? I didn't, Emma admitted. But someone had to try. She walked away before he could ask more questions, leaving behind a room full of soldiers who had just witnessed something they could not explain for the third time in as many days. The mask was not just cracking now, it was shattering. Evening brought a summons Emma had been expecting. Colonel Ashford requested her presence in his office at 1900 hours, a formal invitation delivered through official channels that left no room for refusal. She arrived precisely on time, finding not only Ashford but Torres and a face she recognized from intelligence briefings she should never have seen. Sit down, Ashford said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. We have some things to discuss. Emma sat. Her posture remained alert but not defensive, the stance of someone prepared for whatever came next. I've received preliminary results from Captain Pierce's background inquiry, Ashford continued. He's asking questions that are going to require answers soon. Answers that don't exist in any official database. Then create them, Emma said. You've done it before. We could. Torres leaned forward, his weathered face serious. But that's not why we brought you here. The situation has changed. Changed how? The third figure in the room spoke for the first time. There has been an incident in Afghanistan, Operation Atlas. An embedded Delta unit went dark 48 hours ago during a K-9-supported reconnaissance mission. Command believes they've been captured by Taliban forces operating in the region. Emma's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. That's not my problem anymore. It wasn't, Ashford agreed. Until we received this. He slid a photograph across the desk. The image was grainy, taken from a surveillance drone at high altitude, but the details were clear enough. A compound in mountainous terrain, armed guards, and in the center courtyard, chained to a post, a shape that Emma recognized instantly. A dog, black coat, distinctive scar on the left ear. That's not possible, she whispered. Our analysts say otherwise. Torres's voice was gentle but firm. The markings match, the build matches. Emma, we believe that's Wraith. The name hit like a physical blow. Wraith, the alpha female of Ghost Pack, the dog Emma had held in her arms as she died, had buried in a shallow grave outside the forward operating base where 12 soldiers had nearly lost their lives. "I buried her," Emma said. "I watched her stop breathing. You were injured," Torres interrupted, "concussed from the final firefight. Your memory of those hours may not be completely accurate." "My memory is fine." "Then explain the photograph." She could not. The evidence was there, undeniable, challenging everything she had believed for 3 years. If Wraith was alive, if she had somehow survived and been captured, then everything Emma had done since that day was based on a foundation that no longer existed. "We're not asking you to make a decision tonight," Ashford said. "But the extraction team launches in 72 hours. They have requested a handler capable of working with unpredictable animals and combat conditions. Someone with experience in exactly the kind of situation they're walking into. You want me to go back? We want to give you the choice. Whatever you decide, your cover here is blown regardless. Pierce will have enough information by tomorrow to force a confrontation. After that, anonymity is no longer an option." Emma stared at the photograph, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. 3 years of hiding, of pretending to be no one, and now the universe was forcing her hand. "There's one more thing," Torres added. "The Delta unit that went dark. We've confirmed their roster. Specialist Chen is among the missing." The world tilted. Amy Chen, who had survived because Emma refused to leave her behind, who had dedicated her career to following a path inspired by that survival, who had recognized Emma despite years of separation and disguise. History was not merely repeating, it was demanding payment. "I need time," Emma said, "to think." "Take the night," Ashford agreed, "but understand that by tomorrow, one way or another, Master Sergeant Emma Sophia Holloway will no longer be invisible." She left the office in a daze, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. In the kennel block, Titan waited behind chain link, his dark eyes tracking her approach with an understanding that transcended species. She stopped in front of his enclosure, fingers wrapping around the metal mesh. "What would you do?" she asked the dog. "If you found out that someone you thought was dead might still be alive?" Titan rose from his bed and padded to the fence. His muzzle pressed against the mesh where her fingers gripped, a warm, wet nose against her skin. The answer was obvious, had always been obvious. She would not leave them behind. Not again. Not ever. Dawn arrived with the weight of inevitability. Emma had not slept, spending the hours instead in quiet communion with the dogs she had come to know over 3 years of voluntary exile. Each enclosure held a story, each animal a life that had been shaped by human hands for purposes both noble and terrible. They were weapons, yes, but they were also family. Her father had understood that. She had learned it the hard way. The morning training session began at 0600, earlier than usual. Pierce had pushed the schedule forward again, his suspicions demanding resolution that could no longer be delayed. The Delta operators assembled in the outdoor training area, their faces carrying the particular tension of soldiers who sensed something significant approaching without understanding its nature. Emma took her position among the support staff, her coveralls still stained, her posture still submissive. But the performance felt hollow now, a costume that no longer fit the body wearing it. Too many people had seen too much. The questions had multiplied beyond her ability to deflect them. Torres stood at the edge of the training area, his presence a silent announcement that today would be different. Beside him, Colonel Ashford watched the proceedings with an expression that betrayed nothing of the conversation from the previous night. "Change of plans," Pierce announced to his assembled team. "Today's exercise will focus on handler evaluation. Each of you will demonstrate your progress with your assigned canine partner." The operators exchanged glances. The training had been proceeding according to schedule, with evaluations not expected for another week. The acceleration suggested something had changed in ways they did not understand. Cruz began the demonstrations, his methodical approach setting a standard that the others struggled to match. Garrett performed adequately, but without distinction, his aggressive style producing results that were functional rather than exceptional. Lawson surprised everyone with technical precision that exceeded expectations. Brennan worked with a young Malinois named Scout, his patience and calm demeanor producing a partnership that showed genuine promise. Of all the operators, he alone seemed to understand that the relationship between handler and dog was built on trust rather than dominance. The evaluations continued through the morning, each performance adding data to assessments that would shape careers and futures. Emma watched from the sidelines, her role officially limited to equipment management and animal support. But Pierce had other plans. Holloway, his voice cut through the ambient noise of the training area. Step forward. The command drew immediate attention. Operators turned, their expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. Garrett's face twisted into something approaching anticipation, sensing an opportunity for the entertainment he had been denied. Emma walked to the center of the training area, her pace unhurried despite the weight of eyes upon her. "Sir, you've demonstrated unusual capabilities over the past few days," Pierce said, his tone carrying the careful neutrality of someone conducting an interrogation. "Capabilities that don't align with your personnel file. I'm just a kennel technician, sir. Are you?" Pierce circled her slowly, a predator assessing prey. "Because kennel technicians don't complete obstacle courses faster than Delta operators. They don't calm digs that no handler can control. They don't demonstrate knowledge of classified canine protocols." The training area had gone silent. Even the dogs seemed to sense the tension, their ears perked forward in attention. "I've worked with animals my whole life," Emma repeated. "Some skills come naturally." Natural. Pierce stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the calculation behind his eyes. "Let's test that theory. Crews, bring out Titan." A murmur swept through the assembled soldiers. Titan's reputation had only grown since Emma's first demonstration, the story of his aggressive response to Garrett spreading through the unit like wildfire. Crews hesitated. "Sir, that animal is scheduled for behavioral evaluation. He's not cleared for training exercises." "Consider this part of his evaluation." Pierce's gaze never left Emma's face. "If Miss Holloway can work with him as well as she claims, that information would be valuable for our assessment." The chain link gate opened and Titan emerged. His dark form moved with the coiled tension of barely restrained violence, eyes scanning the crowd of unfamiliar humans with suspicion that bordered on hostility. When his gaze found Emma, something shifted. The tension remained, but its quality changed, becoming protective rather than aggressive. "Standard obstacle course," Pierce ordered. "Full tactical simulation, no verbal commands." Emma's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. The exercise Pierce had designed was not standard evaluation. It was a trap, intended to force her into revealing capabilities that should not exist in someone of her supposed background. But refusing would accomplish nothing except confirming the suspicions already forming in his mind. She took Titan's lead. The course unfolded before them, a gauntlet of obstacles, barriers, and simulated threat targets. Emma's hand rose, fingers forming the first signal, and the world narrowed to the connection between handler and dog. They moved as a single unit. Titan responded to her commands with precision that defied his reputation, navigating obstacles and engaging targets with the focused intensity of an animal who had finally found someone worth following. Each signal flowed into the next, a conversation conducted in silence that spoke louder than any words. The course demanded everything: speed, accuracy, adaptability. Emma provided it all, her body moving with the muscle memory of countless hours spent in training environments far more dangerous than this one. She finished in 37 seconds, a new facility record. The silence that followed was absolute. Pierce stared at the woman before him, his careful composure cracking for the first time since the training had begun. The performance he had just witnessed was not merely impressive, it was impossible, the work of someone with years of advanced handling experience that her file claimed did not exist. "Who are you?" The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Before Emma could respond, the situation escalated in ways none of them had anticipated. Garrett moved. Later, he would claim that he was simply trying to take control of the situation, to prevent a potential security breach by detaining an obvious imposter. In the moment, his actions looked more like the frustrated lunge of a man who had been humiliated one too many times and was seeking payback. His hand closed around Emma's upper arm, fingers digging into muscle with bruising force. "I knew it. I knew there was something wrong with you from the start." Emma's response was automatic, trained into her by years of combat experience. Her arm rotated against his grip, breaking the hold with mechanical efficiency. Her other hand came up, palm striking his chest with just enough force to create distance without causing injury. Garrett stumbled backward, his foot caught on uneven ground. He fell. And in the chaos of his descent, his flailing hand caught the collar of Emma's coveralls. Fabric tore. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence of the training area, a ripping noise that exposed more than skin. Emma's right shoulder came into view, bared by the torn garment. And on that shoulder sat a mark that changed everything. A black wolf, teeth bared in eternal defiance. Below it, 2 words in military stencil: "Ghost Pack, and beneath that, a single number, 7. The tattoo of the most classified canine unit in United States military history. Time stopped. Torres was the first to move. The command sergeant major crossed the training area with strides that carried the weight of 3 decades of service. His weathered face transformed by recognition that went beyond mere identification. When he reached Emma, he did something that no one in that crowd would ever forget. He snapped to attention and rendered a salute. Master Sergeant Holloway. His voice cracked with emotion. He made no attempt to hide. Call sign Phantom, sole survivor of Operation Crimson Dawn. The words hit the assembled soldiers like artillery rounds. Garrett, still on the ground, went pale. Cruz's clipboard slipped from nerveless fingers. Pierce took an involuntary step backward, his carefully constructed theories shattering against a reality that exceeded anything he had imagined. That operation, Pierce's voice emerged hoarse and uncertain. Crimson Dawn. I thought it was a myth, a story they told at Bragg to motivate trainees. No myth. Torres lowered his salute, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. August 2017, Helmand Province. A forward operating base came under assault by Taliban forces. 12 soldiers were cut off, wounded, unable to evacuate. Command ordered full withdrawal. He paused, the memory clearly painful even after years of distance. Master Sergeant Holloway refused. She held a defensive position for 9 hours with 4 military working dogs and limited ammunition. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found 12 survivors and a single handler who had not slept, had not eaten, and had not stopped fighting for a single moment. Ashford stepped forward, adding his voice to the account. The dogs that served with her that day were not ordinary military working dogs. They were Ghost Pack, the most advanced canine unit ever developed by the United States military, trained to operate independently, to make tactical decisions without handler input, to protect their assigned personnel at any cost. 4 dogs entered that fight, Torres continued. 4 dogs who had been given the order to withdraw and refused to obey. They stayed because their handler stayed. They fought because she fought. And when the ammunition ran low and the enemy closed in, they formed a perimeter around the wounded soldiers and held it with nothing but teeth and determination. Emma stood motionless, the torn coveralls exposing the tattoo that marked her as something more than she had pretended to be. Memories she had buried surfaced unbidden, images of fire and blood and the faces of dogs who had given everything. Shadow, she said quietly, the names emerging like a prayer. Reaper, Storm, Wraith. All 4 were awarded the K9 Medal of Valor posthumously, Ashford added. Their handler received the Distinguished Service Cross, classified and sealed by order of the Secretary of Defense. Garrett had managed to climb to his feet, but his usual aggression had evaporated completely. His face cycled through expressions that reflected a mind struggling to reconcile the woman he had dismissed as worthless with the legend standing before him. I called her. He could not finish the sentence. Poop Girl, Brennan supplied, his voice flat. You called her Poop Girl, a Delta Force operator who held a position for 9 hours against impossible odds. A handler whose dogs chose to die rather than abandon her. The shame that spread across Garrett's features was visible to everyone watching. Cruz stepped forward, his technical mind demanding clarification. The hand signals, the ones you used with Titan, they're not in any manual because they were developed specifically for Ghost Pack operations. Classified protocols designed for dogs that could operate independently in combat situations. Emma nodded slowly. The standard signals are based on simple command-response patterns. Ghost Pack required something more sophisticated, a language that could communicate tactical information, threat assessment, even emotional state, and you can still use them. The realization struck Cruz with almost physical force. After 3 years of pretending to be no one, you can still communicate with military working dogs at a level that most handlers never achieve. The skills don't disappear. Emma's voice carried exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. They become part of you, like breathing. Pierce found his voice at last. Why? Why hide all of this? Why pretend to be a kennel worker when you could have commanded any canine unit in the military? The question demanded an answer that Emma had avoided giving for 3 years. She looked at the faces surrounding her, the mixture of shock and awe and dawning respect, and found that she lacked the energy to maintain her defenses any longer. Because 4 dogs died following my orders, she said simply, because I buried them in foreign soil, and told myself that I would never ask another animal to make that sacrifice. Because sometimes the weight of what you've done becomes so heavy that the only way to carry it is to become no one at all. The confession hung in the air, raw and honest in a way that military culture rarely permitted. Amy Chen pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "I was one of the 12, she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was wounded so badly that I couldn't move. I watched her fight for 9 hours. I watched those dogs form a wall between us and death." She turned to face the assembled operators, her small frame somehow commanding attention that her rank did not justify. When the enemy finally broke through, when it looked like everything was over, Wraith took a position directly in front of me. She was wounded, bleeding from a dozen places, and she still put herself between me and the threat. Chen's voice broke. "That dog saved my life, and this woman trained her to do it." The testimony transformed the atmosphere of the training area. Soldiers who had laughed at Emma's coveralls now stood in uncomfortable silence, their assumptions shattered by truths they had never imagined. Megan Lawson, whose social manipulation had contributed to the harassment, found herself unable to meet Emma's eyes. The queen bee who had looked down on the kennel worker discovered that her throne was built on foundations of ignorance and arrogance. Dalton, remembering his drunken confrontation from 2 nights before, seemed to shrink into himself. The saboteur who had enjoyed causing trouble for someone he considered beneath him now understood that he had been baiting a predator while mistaking it for prey. Brandon Cruz knelt on one knee, a gesture of respect that transcended military protocol. "Master Sergeant, I apologize for any disrespect I may have shown. I should have recognized the signs earlier." "You did." Emma's response surprised him. "You asked questions when others made assumptions. That's more than most." Pierce approached with the careful bearing of someone who had drastically miscalculated and was now attempting to recover. "Master Sergeant Holloway, I initiated background checks that could have compromised your cover. Whatever the reason for your anonymity, I may have damaged operational security." "The cover was always temporary," Emma replied. "Colonel Ashford and Sergeant Major Torres knew my identity from the beginning. My assignment here was never about hiding permanently." This revelation created another ripple of surprise through the crowd. "Then why?" Garrett managed to ask, his voice smaller than anyone had ever heard it. "Why the coveralls? Why the insults? Why let us treat you like that?" Emma considered him for a long moment before answering. "Because the first test of any handler isn't skill with animals, it's character. How you treat those you consider beneath you reveals everything about who you really are." The implication struck like a blow. The harassment, the mockery, the casual cruelty had all been observed, cataloged, and evaluated. "I was sent here to assess which members of your unit are ready for advanced canine integration training," Emma continued. "Ghost Pack protocols require handlers who understand that the relationship between human and dog is built on mutual respect, not dominance. Operators who dismiss support staff as worthless will dismiss their canine partners the same way." Ashford stepped forward to address the group. "What Master Sergeant Holloway has described is accurate. Her mission here was twofold. First, to evaluate your unit for potential inclusion in the new Ghost Pack program. Second, to determine whether the operational concepts developed during the original program can be taught to a new generation of handlers." "The original Ghost Pack was disbanded after Crimson Dawn," Torres added. "The dogs were considered too valuable to risk in future operations. But the methods, the training protocols, the relationship between handler and animal, those survived, in one person." Every eye turned to Emma. "You're the only one who knows how to create Ghost Pack handlers," Pierce realized. "That's why you're here, not just to evaluate us, but to determine if the program can be rebuilt." "Can it?" The question came from Brennan, who had listened in silence throughout the revelation. Emma looked at him, seeing something in his expression that she had not encountered since the loss of her original team. Hope. Genuine, unguarded hope that perhaps the skills she carried could be passed on. "One person passed the assessment," she said. "One person demonstrated the qualities that Ghost Pack handlers require." She reached into the pocket of her torn coveralls and withdrew an object that gleamed in the morning light. A challenge coin, silver and worn, bearing the image of a wolf and the number 7. "Sergeant Brennan." She extended the coin toward him. "You were the only one who defended me from the beginning. Not because you knew who I was, but because you believed that everyone deserves basic respect, regardless of their position." Brennan accepted the coin with hands that trembled slightly. "I don't understand. I'm not the best handler in the unit, My scores are nowhere near the top. Scores measure skill, they don't measure character. Emma's gaze swept across the assembled operators. Ghost Pack dogs don't follow handlers because of technical proficiency. They follow handlers who earn their trust, who treat them as partners rather than tools. The words carried weight that transformed their meaning. Every operator present understood that they were witnessing something significant. The birth of a new chapter in a story they had not known existed. Titan chose that moment to act. The massive Belgian Malinois had remained at Emma's side throughout the confrontation, his dark eyes tracking every movement with protective attention. Now, he rose from his position and padded across the training area, his trajectory taking him directly toward Brennan. The sergeant froze as the dog approached. Titan's reputation preceded him, stories of handlers driven to request transfers by his aggressive behavior. Having the animal approach voluntarily was unprecedented. Titan stopped in front of Brennan and sat down. His tail moved in a single deliberate wag. Then, in a gesture that every handler present recognized as profound, he lowered his head and pressed his muzzle against Brennan's palm. Titan is Shadow's son, Emma explained softly. Shadow was the alpha of Ghost Pack, the leader who organized the defense that saved 12 lives. His bloodline carries something that training alone cannot produce. And he's choosing me? Brennan's voice cracked with emotion. He's giving you a chance. Whether you earn his loyalty is up to you. The moment stretched, filled with implications that would reshape careers and lives. Then Brennan knelt beside the dog, one hand resting gently on Titan's scarred muzzle, and something passed between them that words could not capture. Dusty Coleman emerged from the crowd, his weathered face carrying a smile that had not appeared in years. Well done, Phantom. Your father would be proud. Emma turned to face the old man, the mention of her father stirring emotions she had long suppressed. You knew him. Trained under him. Ghost Pack, first generation, before anyone understood what we were building. Coleman's eyes grew distant with memory. He used to say that the dogs weren't weapons. They were family. And family doesn't abandon each other, no matter what the orders say. He was right. The admission cost Emma something, a final piece of the armor she had constructed around her grief. I spent 3 years running from that truth, pretending that if I became no one, the weight of what happened would somehow lighten. Did it? No. She looked at the soldiers surrounding her, at the dogs waiting in their kennels, at the legacy her father had begun and she had inherited. But hiding never lightens anything. It just delays the reckoning. The gathering began to disperse as the reality of what they had witnessed settled into understanding. Operators who had mocked Emma now maintained respectful distance, their assumptions replaced by something closer to reverence. Those who had shown her kindness found themselves elevated in ways that protocol did not recognize, but everyone understood. Garrett approached last, his massive frame somehow diminished by the weight of his shame. He stopped several feet from Emma, unable to close the remaining distance. Master Sergeant, the words emerged rough and uncertain. I don't know what to say. I spent 3 days treating you like dirt. I thought you were beneath me. You thought I was what my uniform told you I was. That's no excuse. No, Emma's agreement offered no comfort. It's not. But it's also the first honest thing you've said since you arrived at this facility. Garrett swallowed beard. Is there any way I can fix this? Earn a second chance? The question hung between them, carrying implications that extended far beyond personal redemption. Emma studied his face, looking for something beneath the surface of his shame. Second chances exist, she said finally, but they're earned through action, not words. I've seen what you are when you think no one important is watching. Changing that will require more than apology. What would I need to do? Start by understanding why you treated me the way you did. Then make certain you never treat anyone else that way again. Not because of who they might turn out to be, but because of who you want to become. The advice was not forgiveness, but it was something, a path forward for someone willing to walk it. As Garrett withdrew, Pierce approached with formal bearing. Master Sergeant Holloway, given the revelation of your identity and expertise, I formally request your guidance in restructuring our canine training program. Whatever happened before, your knowledge is too valuable to waste. The request is noted, Captain. But my immediate mission has changed. Emma's expression shifted, the instructor giving way to the operator. Last night, I received intelligence that requires immediate action. The Atlas situation. Pierce nodded grimly. We've been briefed on the missing unit. Then you know that Specialist Chen is among the captured. The same soldier who survived Crimson Dawn because 4 dogs and 1 handler refused to leave her behind. The implication was clear. History was demanding a response. And Emma Sophia Holloway was not someone who ignored such demands. Ashford joined the conversation, his authority settling over the group. An extraction team is being assembled. Master Sergeant Holloway has been requested as primary handler for the canine component. Requested by whom? Pierce asked. By me. Torres stepped forward. The situation requires someone with experience in exactly the scenarios they'll encounter. Someone who can work with animals under combat stress. Someone who has already proven that she will not leave soldiers behind. The statement carried weight that silenced any objection. When do you deploy? Brennan asked, his hand still resting on Titan's head. 72 hours. Preparation begins immediately. Emma turned to face the assembled group one final time. Her bearing transformed from kennel worker to combat operator in ways that redefined everything they thought they understood. For those who wondered why I chose to remain anonymous, I hope today provided answers. Sometimes the heaviest burdens are carried in silence, and sometimes the most important work is done by people no one notices. She paused, her gray eyes sweeping across faces that had changed in their perception of her over the course of 3 remarkable days. For those who will continue the canine program after I leave, remember this. The dogs do not care about your rank, your unit patch, or your accomplishments. They care about who you are when no one is watching. Earn their trust honestly, and they will follow you into any darkness. Betray that trust, and no amount of training will save you. The words settled into memories that would be repeated for years to come. A lesson delivered by someone who had paid the highest price for its truth. As Emma walked toward the administrative building to begin mission preparation, Titan rose from his position beside Brennan and followed. The massive Belgian Malinois fell into step at her left side, his dark form a shadow that moved with purpose older than any of them understood. The Ghost Pack handler had returned to service, and somewhere in Afghanistan, soldiers waited for rescue that only she could provide. The command center buzzed with activity as the extraction operation took shape. Maps covered every surface, satellite imagery displayed on screens, communications equipment humming with encrypted traffic. Emma stood at the center of it all, transformed from anonymous kennel worker to tactical coordinator in the space of hours. The plan was complex. Taliban forces had moved the captured Delta team to a compound in the mountains, a position that offered natural defensive advantages and limited approach options. Standard extraction would require significant force that might arrive too late for prisoners whose value decreased with each passing hour. But there was another way. Ghost Pack protocols included provisions for independent canine insertion, Emma explained to the assembled team. Dogs trained to infiltrate positions, locate targets, and prepare the ground for handler follow-up. You're proposing to send dogs in ahead of the main force? Pierce's skepticism was evident. I'm proposing to send myself in ahead of the main force, with canine support. Emma pointed to the compound's schematic. The guards are watching for human signatures. They're not watching for animals. A single handler with a trained dog can reach positions that a full team cannot. That's suicide. Garrett's objection surprised everyone, including himself. Even with Ghost Pack training, one person against that kind of opposition is exactly what worked at Crimson Dawn. Torres cut off the protest. Master Sergeant Holloway has done this before, successfully. The debate continued. Tactical considerations weighed against operational reality. In the end, Command approved a modified version of Emma's proposal. She would insert with a small advance element, using Titan to scout the approach and identify guard positions. The main extraction force would follow once the way was clear. The night before deployment, Emma visited the kennel block one final time. Titan waited in his enclosure, his dark eyes reflecting understanding that transcended species. He knew what was coming. He had always known. Last time I did this, 4 of my dogs didn't come home. Emma's voice was barely audible. The words meant only for the animal before her. I've spent 3 years running from that memory, telling myself that I would never ask another partner to take that risk. Titan pressed against the chain link, his muzzle seeking contact with her hand. But running doesn't change anything, does it? The mission still exists. The people still need help. And the only one who can provide it is the person who stopped believing she could. She opened the enclosure and knelt beside the massive Belgian Malinois, her arms wrapping around his scarred neck in an embrace that carried 3 years of suppressed grief. Your father was the bravest dog I ever knew. He taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and acting anyway. She pulled back, meeting Titan's eyes with determination that had finally found its purpose. Tomorrow, we're going to bring our people home, whatever it costs. Titan's response was a single lick across her face, a gesture of acceptance and commitment that sealed their partnership. The ghost pack was rising again. Dawn brought the helicopter that would carry Emma and Titan toward destiny. The advance team assembled on the flight line, their faces carrying the particular focus of soldiers preparing for combat. Brennan was among them, his request to join the operation approved despite his limited experience. "You don't have to do this," Emma told him as they loaded equipment. "The extraction doesn't require additional handlers." "Yes, it does." Brennan's voice carried conviction that his training had not provided. "You spent 3 days teaching us what it really means to work with these animals. I'm not going to let you go alone." The helicopter lifted off as the sun crested the horizon, carrying them toward a future that remained uncertain. Below, Fort Bragg receded into distance, taking with it the anonymous life that Emma had constructed and would never reclaim. Ahead lay Afghanistan, a captured team, and the ghost of a dog that might still be alive. The mission details blurred together in the hours that followed: insertion under cover of darkness, movement through terrain that punished every step, the constant vigilance required when operating in hostile territory where any shadow might conceal death. Titan moved ahead, his senses extending their awareness far beyond human capability. Each pause communicated information, each gesture told a story of threat or safety that Emma translated through the years of partnership with animals who spoke this silent language. They found the compound at 0300, a collection of buildings nestled against a cliff face that provided natural protection from aerial observation. Guards patrolled in patterns that suggested confidence born of isolation, their attention focused outward toward approaches they considered vulnerable. They were not watching for a woman and a dog moving through shadows they had dismissed as empty. The infiltration required patience that combat training rarely developed. Emma moved inches at a time, her body pressed against terrain that offered minimal concealment. Titan ranged ahead, his dark coat invisible against the night, his presence marking safe passages through the guards' overlapping fields of observation. When they reached the compound's perimeter, the real challenge began. The prisoners were held in a building near the center of the compound, guarded by forces whose attention had been drawn outward by the approaching extraction team. Emma's role was to reach them first, to prepare the ground for rescue by eliminating the immediate threats to their survival. Titan led the way. The dog moved through the compound with the focused precision of an animal who understood exactly what was required. Guards who might have detected human movement ignored the shadow that passed behind them, their training inadequate for threats that did not match expected patterns. Emma followed, her weapon ready, her senses extended to maximum alertness. Each step brought her closer to the building, where Amy Chen and 11 other soldiers waited for rescue that might arrive too late. The door was ahead. 2 guards flanked it, their postures carrying the boredom of men who did not expect challenge. Titan struck first. The attack was silent and devastating, the product of training that prioritized efficiency over drama. One guard fell before he understood what had happened. The second had time to draw breath for a shout that never came as Emma's hand closed over his mouth. The door opened. Inside, the prisoners lay in various states of injury and exhaustion. Amy Chen looked up as light from outside illuminated the figure standing in the doorway, her face cycling through disbelief and recognition that transcended the years between them. "It's you," she whispered. "It's me." Emma moved into the room, her hands already working to free the restraints that held the captured soldiers. "Can you move?" "Some of us. The others—" Chen's voice trailed off, the implications clear. "Then we carry them." Emma keyed her radio. "Phantom to Overwatch, package located, 11 souls, mixed mobility, request immediate extraction." The response came through static. "Overwatch copies, extraction inbound, hold position." The next minute stretched into eternity. Emma positioned herself at the door, weapon ready, while Titan patrolled the perimeter with tireless vigilance. The captured soldiers who could move helped those who could not, their training asserting itself despite the ordeal they had endured. When the helicopters arrived, their rotors drowning the night in sound, the compound erupted into chaos. Guards who had been watching the wrong approaches suddenly found themselves surrounded by forces they had not anticipated. The extraction was messy but successful. Soldiers moved through predetermined patterns, securing the prisoners and eliminating threats with professional efficiency. Emma covered the withdrawal, her position holding the corridor that led to the landing zone. The last soldier was aboard when she finally allowed herself to breathe. "Master Sergeant," Chen's voice cut through the helicopter's noise. "Thank you, again. Don't thank me yet." Emma's attention had shifted to something outside the aircraft, her eyes fixed on a movement that should not have been there. A dog. Black coat. moving through the compound's chaos with purpose that suggested intelligence beyond animal instinct. And on its left ear, barely visible in the flickering light of fires that had begun to consume the buildings, a scar shaped like a lightning bolt. "Wraith," Emma breathed. The helicopter lifted before she could act, carrying her away from the ghost she had thought buried in foreign soil. Below, the compound collapsed into flames, taking with it whatever answers might have existed. But the image remained, burned into memory like the tattoo on her shoulder. Wraith was alive. Somehow, impossibly, the alpha female of Ghost Pack had survived Crimson Dawn and spent 3 years in captivity, waiting for rescue that had finally arrived. And now she was gone again, disappeared into the Afghan night, a mystery that would haunt Emma's dreams for years to come. The return to Fort Bragg brought closure of a different kind. The Delta team had been rescued, Chen among them. The mission was classified successful, the details buried in files that would never see public light. But for those who had witnessed Emma's revelation and understood its implications, something fundamental had changed. The Ghost Pack program was officially reactivated 1 month later. Brennan became its first new handler, his partnership with Titan forming the foundation for a unit that would eventually rival its predecessor. The training protocols Emma had carried in solitude for 3 years were documented, refined, and prepared for transmission to a new generation. Garrett requested transfer to the program 6 weeks after Emma's departure. His application included a personal statement that acknowledged his failures and committed to earning the trust he had once dismissed as irrelevant. Emma approved it personally, recognizing in his words the first genuine steps toward the person he had the potential to become. The others found their own paths. Cruz became lead instructor for the technical aspects of K9 operations. Ruiz used her intelligence background to develop new methods of handler assessment. Even Lawson discovered an unexpected aptitude for the patient relationship building that Ghost Pack required. As for Emma, the mission in Afghanistan had reminded her of truths she had tried to forget. The weight of Crimson Dawn would never fully lift, but carrying it no longer required isolation. The family her father had described, the bond between handler and dog that transcended orders and protocols, still existed, still mattered. She received one final message before deploying on her next classified operation. A photograph taken by a surveillance drone over the mountains of Afghanistan. In the image, barely visible against rocky terrain, a black dog stood watching the sky, waiting. The search for Wraith would continue. The Ghost Pack legacy would endure. And somewhere in the shadows where the most important work was done, Master Sergeant Emma Sophia Holloway would keep her promise. She would not leave them behind, not ever again. This story reminds us of a truth we often forget in our rush to judge others. The most extraordinary people rarely advertise their strength. Emma Sophia Holloway endured 3 days of mockery, humiliation, and disrespect from soldiers who believed her coveralls defined her worth. She could have revealed her identity at any moment and silenced her critics with a single word. Instead, she chose to observe, to evaluate, and to teach a lesson that no classroom could deliver. The greatest warriors do not need to prove themselves to anyone. They carry their scars in silence, their medals in memories, and their valor in actions that speak louder than any boast. True strength is not measured by how loudly you proclaim your achievements, but by how quietly you serve when no one is watching. The soldiers who mocked Emma learned something invaluable that day. The way you treat those you consider beneath you reveals everything about your character. Respect is not a reward for status. It is a reflection of who you are as a human being. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that quiet professionals and hidden heroes deserve recognition, then share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Subscribe to our channel and join a community that honors those who serve in silence. Leave a comment telling us about a time when you witnessed someone being underestimated and later proved everyone wrong. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And together, we can remind the world that true greatness often wears the most humble disguise.